So, Sean, just wanted to take us back a little bit to your youth, because you were,
We're going back quite a little bit then.
yeah, Dickensian times, It goes back to, well, you were a leaseholder, weren't you?
I was,
You owned your couple of flats, didn't you,
Couple of
as a
flats.
leaseholder? So
Yeah.
you'll be familiar with paying ground rent, for example, and you'll be familiar with how leaseholders get a pretty rum deal, really,
Yeah.
because they pretty often have to just roll with the way that the management company or the freeholder wants to maintain the buildings, and then without rhyme nor reason can suddenly be slapped with a massive fee, can't they, for refurbishments and stuff like that? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, just to give you an indication of that, my second flat, which eventually the leaseholders bought the freehold. There were 6 flats there. But prior to that, what I think encouraged them to buy the freehold was the fact that the freeholder, they produce maintenance accounts, obviously on an annual basis for maintenance that needs to be done to the property, and they charge maintenance. That's the overriding cost normally, rather than the ground rent. They charge maintenance and split it amongst the 6 particular flats as there were there. It was hugely expensive every year, and they were using another one of their companies. They owned the company that came and did the maintenance, and so every year you paid through the nose because they went as long as it was a money making exercise, and they had a portfolio of properties across Sussex, and they must have been making all this money on supposed maintenance and all of these properties every year. Ultimately, because the 6 leaseholders could agree in that situation, they got together and bought them out. I think the law as it stood at that point was you had to have 75% of the leaseholders agreeing to buy out the freehold, and then they could set almost a price for the freehold, so it could be astronomically expensive to do so. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you in your flow, just to give you an indication.
Well,
really.
Not really, because that's a very good example of let's call it the tenure that is being proposed in this reform bill, the Leasehold Reform Bill, which obviously has to go through Parliament and whatnot. But basically, the idea is that new leasehold flats would not be prohibited anymore, and there's going to be a new tenure, which is quite common elsewhere, and actually is called common hold. So this is a system like you ended up with, where the flat owners jointly own and manage the building, and that's to be strengthened by a new legal framework. So I think that's actually quite a good thing, I suppose, because you would have then had both experiences, wouldn't you? One as a freeholder and then one as a leaseholder. So when you became a freeholder, did it work? Did everyone do their bit and everyone was happy to go along with decisions that the freeholders made?
Yeah. I didn't have there wasn't a problem with it all the time I was living there. I can imagine, but I suppose that'd be the same if it were owned by an independent freeholder, that on occasion, if work needed to be done to the building, there may be people who were living there who didn't have the money available to cough up the extra. Yeah. So I can imagine that might, the more residents you've got, I don't really call them residents, the more common holders, I guess, the more likelihood ultimately that you're going to have a problem with somebody not being able to find the money to pay, isn't it, really? Because exceptional expenditure. Say you have a storm and the roof gets blown in, for example, which is most likely on occasion, then you have to cough up with money that might not be available in the fund that you've collected for. So you'd have an extraordinary expense, effectively.
Yeah.
And some people may just not be able to raise that money to be able to afford to pay that.
The sort of places you lived, because I remember them, what's the word I'm looking for? They were protected areas, weren't they? So the buildings had to look a certain way and a certain colour, didn't they?
Listed.
Listed. So that's the other thing, isn't it? If you're in that sort of area, like, a seaside town or Bath is the one that comes to mind, then you not only got to do the maintenance, but you've got to keep it in a certain look and feel, haven't you, to satisfy it? And that, so I guess the issue is that sometimes you've got to be careful what you wish for, Because let's just say in your case, you've got then 6 freeholders, as they were called then. Each one's got to do their bit, haven't they, in terms of, meeting and agreeing things, and maybe some things you do collectively, like tidy up any garden area or something to save the costs.
Yeah. I mean, that's.
And were you a good sort of volunteer? Were you putting your shoulder to it? I know how much you love gardening, for example.
Well, there were people there there were people I didn't. To be frank, it was
here we go.
It was a communal garden. I didn't really use the garden that much.
It doesn't matter, does it?
There wasn't much happening in there, but there were 2 or 3 people there who actually enjoyed doing that type of thing. So I let them get on with it. Really, it wasn't really my bag. I was more.
You were more strategy, were you?
Yeah, I was more. Yeah. But I used to go along to the meetings. We had meetings. We had of course. It was we had to set up a limited company at the end of the day because that was that was for the amount of accounts that were signed off and everything you would do along those lines.
Yeah, of course.
Every year. But I think whichever way you look at it, I suppose some people are not going to be able to come up with the money to be able to meet the obligations. The worrying thing, of course, with leaseholders, freeholders can go for forfeiture of lease if you don't pay up your
and you don't get any money, do you?
And you don't get anything. No,
don't even get a proportion.
No, wipes your lease off. So
well, that's being changed anyway.
Yeah, and so it should do. I think that's quite right.
Okay,
it's difficult, isn't it, with leasehold properties? It's
you
never. It's like a long-term rental agreement, to be perfectly frank with you, isn't it?
It is. So there's 2 things going on here. There's this new tenure called common hold, and whenever the bill comes into force, that's how new flats will be constituted. And then you've got, well, what about the existing leaseholds? Because they exist. You can't just wipe them out.
No.
And the measures being introduced there is that ground rents, not maintenance, going to be capped at $250 a year, which I think helps some people because it's always preposterous how you've got this person in this legacy freeholder could just skim you.
Well, that's the thing with because ground rent, to be fair, where I was, ground rent, they always used to call it was called peppercorn ground rent.
That old, basically nothing.
The old, virtually nothing. You paid five a year or what have
Andrew Mountbatten level rent.
I think what's happened is that since the previous governments have brought in restrictions regarding maintenance, so that, for example, since I've got rid of my leasehold property, the freeholders can now, the leaseholders can now get together and say, you have to provide us with 4 or 5 different quotes for any jobs you're having done, and we'll pick which quote it is. So there's not as much money to be made for the freeholder in that regard. And so they've then turned to something that's not been regulated, the ground rent, and that has now stopped being peppercorn because it was never fixed. And the cost of that has gone up through the roof.
So they're going to, that's within this bill anyway. And then they're also going to, again, this is for existing leaseholders. As you'll know, one of the worries if you're in a lease and you've bought it maybe with, 85 years to go, as that ticks down towards 70, the value of the flat starts to diminish. Well, the good news there is this bill should simplify and reduce the costs for leaseholders of extending their right to a longer lease. So that's good news, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. It is. And as you said earlier, the forfeiture rights, they're going to abolish that nonsense that you can forfeit the lease. For example, if you don't pay your maintenance charge or ground rent and replace it with fairer enforcement. So maybe if you did lose your home as a result, you would at least, once you've paid off what you owed, keep the rest, which is entirely reasonable and absolutely bonkers that it wouldn't have been like that in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I should just say at this point, as we're coming to an end on this particular topic, that there are responsible freeholders out there. They're not all making money out of their leaseholders. Some are responsible. And it is a responsibility, and they need, they should get paid for what they do. So I don't want to brush all freeholders as making money, but it's certainly well overdue. And this is the government that said they were going to scrap leasehold altogether, didn't they? But that was
Well, I'm
part of
afraid
that.
they have. It is another one of, I think there's about 18 U-turns now.
Mm,
And if he was driving a car, he'd be going around in circles, wouldn't he, at
yeah.
this rate? But and the last thing I wanted to say on this is you may wonder where the crikey did leasehold came from. It's actually a feudal system.
Right.
So we've taken our time, but it looks like we're getting there.
So this was renting places to grow your turnips.
Well, it was basically the king of the day would have leased land to all his, knights and barons and everything else.
Yeah.
And they did likewise to the ordinary people like us.
Yeah. The peasants could go out. Yeah.
So the peasants are revolting and all that stuff. But there we are. So a bit of good news for leaseholders.